Right. So what we did, if suppose we are given, let's say we are in we are in an inner product space, and we are given a linearly independent set of vectors. So we talked about finite set only. So if suppose we are given, let's say n vectors, n linearly independent vectors in an inner product space, then we can apply Gram-Smith process. So we can start by with the first vector, and then we can keep on. There is a way, or you can call it an algorithm or a method. There is a way to orthogonalize these given set of vectors in such a way that they span exactly the same space which was spanned by the given vectors. Now, I what we did. So let me just summarize it. So we are in an, let's say, in a inner product space, and we are given a linearly independent set of vectors in V. Then we can generate by using Gram-Smith process, orthogonalization process. We can generate vectors, let's say Q1 to Qn, such that these are orthogonal, and span of V1 to Vk is equal to span of Q1 to Qk for all k greater than equal to 1, less than equal to n. This is what we saw, and we proved this also. And this that proof gives us a way to do it one by one, starting with the first vector. Now, I have talked about a finite set of vectors, but you can do it in the same way because it's an algorithm. So you can say in general that if suppose we have a countable linearly independent set, so or you can say that, okay, suppose V is an inner product space, and let's say that V1, V2, these are linear. This is a linearly independent set in V. It's infinite linearly independent set in V. Then using the Gram-Smith again the same way, you can generate a set of vectors q1, q2, and so on, such that these are orthogonal, and similarly they span the same space. This is also true. You can just generalize it, and you can use the induction method to prove this. Okay. So up to this, we had covered in the last lecture. Now I'll give you one example how to use this method. But before that, uh, let me tell you that whatever the way we have proved this gives us a kind of we can use this method to give a factorization of a matrix. So this is just comes complementary as an application of this Gram-Smith process. So what I want to say is that if suppose we are given a matrix, let's say square matrix of size n cross n, then we can decompose this matrix A into two factors. One is called Q, one is called R. This is just a standard notation. So we can factorize this matrix A into two factors Q and R, where Q is a unitary matrix. What is a unitary matrix? A matrix is called unitary if its columns are orthonormal. So when I say columns are orthonormal, that means there is an inner product in the background. So if A is n cross n, so each column is of length n. So these are vectors in Rn or Cn, depending on whether the matrix is real or complex. And then you consider the standard inner product on that set, on that space. And then with respect to this inner product I'm talking about, the columns are orthonormal. So if the columns are orthonormal, then the matrix is called unitary. So an n cross n matrix is called unitary if the columns are orthonormal. And R is an upper triangular matrix. And A can be, using this, A can be written as a product QR. Okay. So this is called QR factorization. There are like different variants of QR factorization, like whether the matrix is square or not, you can always get it. But as a application of this Gram-Smith, I just want to mention that you can factorize a matrix into two factors Q and R. So it is a QR factorization of this matrix A via Gram-Smith. Okay, so let me just write this. This is just some extra information we get from this Gram-Smith process. Okay, so I'll erase this thing and then we can start today's lecture.
Sir,
Yeah,
your screen is not visible, sir.
sorry, my screen is not visible.
Yes,
Okay, so let me see it again. Can you see it now?
yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So let us start today's lecture. So as I said, we get this QR factorization of a matrix as a complementary or as an application of Gram-Smith. So let me write what it is. So we can write it as a corollary. So corollary is a statement which is following from a theorem or from a result. Okay, without doing much. So corollary we can write it as QR factorization, and I'll tell you how important this QR factorization is in general of a matrix. So suppose that we have a matrix A. So I'll talk about this about only for I'll talk only for square matrices, but in general also if the matrix is not a square, one can find its QR factorization. But as a corollary of what we had done in the last lecture, this follows. So let A be non-singular. Let us assume this. This assumption also we don't require in general, but for this explanation, let us assume that this is non-singular. Okay. Then non-singular means it's an invertible matrix because it's an n cross n matrix. Then there exists an unitary matrix. So what is unitary matrix? The columns are orthonormal. So there is a unitary matrix Q of size n cross n and an upper triangular matrix R again of size n cross n such that A is equal to QR. So that means we get a factorization of our matrix A into two factors, and this factorization is called QR factorization. As I mentioned, this is here I have assumed that A is singular, A is non-singular of size n cross n. But even when the A is rank deficient, that means it's not invertible, or whether the matrix is a square matrix or rectangular matrix, we can still find its QR factorization. So that would be a different variant of QR factorization. But let us focus on this. Okay. So this follows, as I mentioned, from the Gram-Smith process. So let me just give you some idea how it follows. Suppose that, so what is given? What we are given matrix A. So let us suppose that we can write this A column wise. So it's an n cross n matrix. So let's say the first column is denoted by V1, second is V2, and so on up to Vn. So where Vi, what is Vi? Vi is the ith column of A. Okay. Now, what is given? Given that A is non-singular or invertible, both are same in this case because A is n cross n. So A is non-singular means A is invertible. So this implies that these vectors v1 to vn, these vectors are linearly independent. So this set is linearly independent. So if I want to use Gram-Smith process, then what it says, if you want to use that, so you need a linearly independent set of vectors, and on that set of vectors, you want to apply the Gram-Smith process. So we have now linearly independent set of vectors here. Now if you recall the proof of that Gram-Smith process, then in that proof I'll just give you a hint and then you can verify. So in the proof of previous result, the Gram-Smith process, if we said so in the, you can verify this in the proof of Gram-Smith process. If we set, let's say for each j, if I set, let's say Rij is the is this it is inner product of Vj with Qi if I is less than j, and it is the length of Qj if I equal to j and 0 otherwise. So uh, this is the these are the entries of our upper triangular matrix, and then with this, if you set now q as the vectors which you get after applying Gram-Smith process on v1 to vn, so we'll get q1 to qn. So arrange these columns as a column of a matrix. Call this matrix as q. So since columns are orthogonal and you can normalize them, so they become orthonormal. So this Q is a unitary matrix, and R you set R as this Rij. So basically it is this one R11, R12, and so on up to R1 and then R22. So the way you have constructed this, so it's an upper triangular matrix, and if you multiply Q and R, then you can verify that this gives you A. So this you can verify. So I just wanted to mention that we can factorize the matrix using Gram-Smith process also. Now, as I mentioned, this QR factorization in general you can find for any matrix A, whether it's a rectangular or whether it's square or rectangular or whether it is invertible or non-invertible. We can always find QR factorization. There would be different variant of QR factorization for that. So that we can probably will probably cover if time permits. We can cover this later on in the in the course. But what I want to say is that this QR factorization is very important in practice, especially when we want to find the let's say eigenvalues of a matrix. So when we'll study, I will talk more about this. When we'll study eigenvalues, then I will talk more about this. But uh, you know that finding eigenvalues of a matrix is a difficult job. For example, if I give you a small matrix, if suppose, so I'm assuming that you have some knowledge of eigenvalue eigenvectors, though we haven't discussed in the course yet. We will do it after this inner product. But if suppose somehow you know eigenvalue eigenvectors, then at this point you can believe me that finding eigenvalue eigenvectors of a matrix when the matrix is a large matrix is a difficult job. It's very challenging. In fact, finding the eigenvalues of a generic matrix or a given general matrix, it's impossible to find its eigenvalues and eigenvectors exactly if the size of the matrix is more than or greater than equal to 5. It is impossible to find. Since it is impossible to find exactly the eigenvalues of a given matrix, for some matrix we can do, like it's a matrix particular structure like diagonal or triangular, then we can easily find. But in general, for any given matrix, you cannot say that you can always find its eigenvalues exactly. So there is no way to find eigenvalues of a given matrix exactly if the size is greater than equal to 5. And therefore, if it is not so, can you hear me, guys?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, fine. So it's since it is impossible, so now since it is impossible to find exactly the eigenvalues, so we need numerical methods, right? If we cannot do it exactly, then okay, let us look at the approximation. What what uh, what we can say? I mean, if not exactly, then how close we can find to the exact values. So that means the numerical methods come into the picture. And then for that eigenvalue algorithm, the process is that if you are given a matrix A, then you somehow convert it in by some method. You convert this A into a matrix which is simple. Simple in the sense that either it is upper triangular, lower triangular, or it is a diagonal matrix. Try to convert into this by using some transformation. You transform this A into this kind of simple matrices, so that eigenvalues of these matrices, since eigenvalues of these matrices is easy to find, they are just the diagonal entries. So you try to transform this A in such a way that under that transformation eigenvalues preserved. So that way we can find eigenvalues of A. That is the idea of eigenvalue algorithm. But in that transformation, in that process, this QR factorization is very important. So actually, it is QR factorization gives us a way to transform this matrix A into a simpler form so that we can find its approximate eigenvalues. Okay. In fact, that algorithm that so the name of the algorithm that finds the eigenvalues, eigenvectors of a matrix is called as QR algorithm. It is called QR algorithm because in the body of this algorithm it uses QR factorization. Okay, we can possibly talk about this algorithm later on, but again it depends how much we cover. So if anybody is interested, they can look into uh, they can search themselves and know more about this thing. Anyway, so let us move on. So I have in the process of Graham Smith, I assume
So,
so we started with linearly independent set
so,
vectors. Yes.
what do you mean by uh, approximate eigenvalues? मतलब कि exact
Approximate that
eigenvalue?
means yeah, exact eigenvalues we cannot find. So suppose that what approximation means, suppose we have a uh, we cannot find, so suppose we give some input algorithm, suppose f is our algorithm, x is the input, so input, and this is algorithm, and we are expecting y, this is the exact solution. But due to some sort of difficulty or challenge, we are not able to find this exact value, then we get some approximate means if this is not exact, then we'll get some y hat is like a solution of this algorithm with this input with the same input x. Now this y hat is called a good approximation if y hat is close to y, and it is still an approximation, but we call it a bad approximation of y if it is not close to y. So y hat is actually approximation means it is a computed solution of some algorithm or some problem. It's not the exact solution, but the computed, which you are expecting it to be close to the exact one. Okay.
Yes, but मतलब जैसे कि अप्रोक्सीमेट आइगन वैल्यू हमें फाइंड हो भी जाती है तो फिर हम उससे कंक्लूड ही क्या कर पाएंगे मतलब जब एग्जैक्ट आइगन वैल्यू हमें पता ही नहीं होगी तो
Yeah, so but then these eigenvalues, whatever eigenvalues we get using this algorithm, whatever algorithm you use, it is proved or it has been proven that these whatever eigenvalues you get after this algorithm, they are good approximation. That means they are like very close to the exact eigenvalues. Okay, so if you cannot find true the exact one, then what is the next thing? So suppose you want to solve some differential system of differential equation. Okay, and there also you need to find for solution you need to find exact solution. But since exact solution is not known because you need to solve a eigenvalue problem there. So if eigenvalues are not known exactly, then you will look for the approximate eigenvalues. That means the computed eigenvalue, and then use that computed eigenvalues to find approximate solution of your system. This whatever dynamical system, whatever differential system or differential equation you are solving, so you still get a solution. Now your job is to see whether how good that solution is, whether from the practical point of view you can expect or you can like accept that solution or not. So it depends on the user how much approximation is fine with his or her problem. So if you are performing some experiment, you are doing something, some you are working on some practical problem, and you want some solution, you are not able to find the exact solution, then your next thing is okay, uh, what is the nearby solution or what is the like good approximation of this, and then you see whether you can work with this good approximation or not. If it is, then you
yes
say
sir.
okay, it is acceptable. So it depends on the user how much error they allow in their problem.
Yes.
depending
Yes.
on the situation. So whatever we are like dealing in our real life problem also, or whatever you see, like you see the distance of earth to moon and earth to sun, and these distances, these are all approximate values. We don't know exact one, but we still like we have a good knowledge of this distance via some method, via some way. So these are approximate values. We don't know exactly because we are not measuring it by like inch step, but it's like we are using some method that we are never sure about a method of giving 100% result. If it is giving a 100% result, then we are calling it an exact thing. But in most of the practical purpose, it is not possible to do it exactly. Then then the second question is, okay, not exactly, then what? How how about the approximation? I mean, how about a nearby solution? If not the exact solution, then a nearby solution. Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah, it's like it depends on the user how much, what is a good approximation for him, or good approximation means what, how much error he can allow in his experiment, in his problem. All right, so I was asking, in Gram-Schmidt process we started with a linearly independent set of vectors. So let me open my previous result, previous lecture, and then I can ask. Okay, so in the maybe not this one. Yeah, it is maybe this one. Just a minute. Okay, this one. So in the Gram-Schmidt process, I have started by with a linearly independent set of vectors. But at some point, suppose my vectors are linearly dependent, or let's say what happens if the Gram-Schmidt process is applied to a linearly dependent set of vectors. Can you say something? So the process, if I apply on a linearly dependent set of vectors, then what happens? Then what kind of vectors I get? So let's say at some point, let's say V1 to Vk, these are linearly independent, but Vk plus 1 is linearly is in the span of V1 to Vk. So the first k vectors are linearly dependent, and let's say Vk plus 1 is linearly dependent with V1 to Vk. That means Vk plus 1 is in the span of V1 to Vk, let's say. Now, if I apply Gram-Schmidt process, then Q1 to Qk I can get using the same way, because it applies on stepwise on one by one vector. So V1 to Vk, from V1 to Vk, I can get a orthogonal set of vectors Q1 to Qk. Okay, that is fine. Now, what can you say about Qk plus 1? So let's look at this one here. This is the general formula of getting the vectors. So what happens if I apply the Gram-Schmidt process on the k plus 1th vector? What would be my Qk plus 1?
So it is in a span.
Span? Span of what?
Span of Q1, Q2, Qk.
How? So what would be Qk plus 1?
So VK plus 1.
Vk plus 1? How?
Sir,
So
we
yes.
so we take V1 equals to Q1, and then proceeding this way, V2 Q1 equals to alpha Q1 into Q2. Then Q1 Q2 equals Q2 Q2 equals to 0.
Q2 equal to 0. So that is 0 only. Q2 cannot be 0. Na? So the inner product of Q2
Yes,
with
sir.
Q2
Yes,
cannot be
sir.
0. It is 0 if and only if Q2 itself is 0.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now look at this. Look at this form. Whatever I have encircled here. Just look at this expression. So assume that in this, suppose that the first m vectors are linearly independent, but the vm plus 1, this is in the span of v1 to vm. Now, what would be my qm plus 1? This is the formula we are using, right? So just look at this formula and then say what would be qm plus 1. First, suppose that vm plus 1 is 0. So let's say vm plus 1 is 0. Then what would be qm plus 1? Because still it is, if it is 0, then it is in the span of v1 to vm. So let us assume that first vm plus 1 is 0. So then what would be qm plus 1?
Zero.
It would be 0.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So qm plus 1 would be 0 if vm plus 1 is 0. Now suppose that vm plus 1 is not 0, but it is in the span of v1 to vm. Then what?
So then again qm plus 1 equals to 0.
Then again? Yeah, I did not hear you. Can you please repeat?
Sir, 0, qm plus 1 equals to 0.
Why?
Sir, because vm plus 1 is the linear combination of
Linear combination of? Okay. So your answer is correct, but justification is not very clear. So let me just ask this again here. So let me give you this as an exercise. Think about it. Okay. So the answer is correct that it would be 0, but why and how? So let me give you this as an exercise. So what happens if the Gram-Smith process is applied to a linearly dependent set of vectors? Think about it. And let me give you one more exercise. This is for those who know some kind of coding, so they can like do some kind of programming and write a code for finding QR factorization of a matrix via Gram-Smith. So as I mentioned, it's very easy. You just look at the process, start by one vector, and then whatever you get, assign them into these Rijs and these columns of Q, and you will get your QR factorization. So write a code for QR factorization of a matrix using Gram-Smith. You can also take the help of Google, and then you can try to write the code for this. Write a code for this. Okay. So this is just an exercise. You can think of this, and you can know more about this. Okay, I'll do one example of how to apply this Gram-Smith process. But before that, let me introduce one more term. It is orthonormal basis. Okay, orthonormal basis. So let's define this. Orthonormal basis. By the way, by in using Gram-Smith, you can also find orthonormal set of vectors. So because whatever I mentioned in that result, it is with that result you can find an orthogonal set of vectors. But once you find orthogonal set of vectors, you can divide each vector by its length, and then whatever set you obtain after that, that would be orthonormal. So you can also find an orthonormal set of vectors using Gram-Smith. So what is orthonormal basis? So suppose that we have a subset B of V, where V is inner product. V is an inner product space. Then this set B is called an orthonormal basis of V if first again V is a basis of V. It's an orthonormal basis, means it's a basis which is also an orthonormal set. Okay. So basis definition we already know. If the set is also orthonormal, then it is called an orthonormal basis. B is a basis and B is orthonormal. Now we know that every vector space. So here I did not assume whether V is finite dimension or infinite dimension. But what we know is that for every vector space, we can always find a basis. The existence of basis is very straightforward. If it is a finite dimension vector space, it's a non-zero finite dimension vector space, then we can start with a, if we know that it is a finite dimension, then we can start with a non-zero vector, and then we can keep on extending it until unless we span the whole space. There is a way to expand a given set. And if it is a linear, if it is an infinite dimension vector space, then also we know via John's lemma that there always exists a basis of a vector space. Now the same question we can ask whether every inner product space also has an orthonormal basis. Okay. Now, what is your guess? What is your guess?
Yes, sir.
The question, you think that it will also have?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so let us see. So the answer is that in general, if the vector space is finite dimensions, or you can say that the inner product space is finite dimensional, then it is easy to find and it will always have. But if it is an infinite dimensional inner product space, then in general it is not true, or it is you cannot say that it will always have basis, orthonormal basis. Okay, so for finite dimension inner product space, it will always have an orthonormal basis, but for infinite dimensional, it need not be, and you need some extra condition for that. So since we have not introduced terms like a complete and it's a complete inner product space, that means a Hilbert space, then it is, but we have not talked about these terms, so we won't discuss about the existence of orthonormal basis for a general inner product space. But for finite dimension inner product space, it is very straightforward. So I'll write this as a result. So you can keep this in mind. If the vector is, if the inner product space is of finite dimensional, then it is easy to find. We can also write this as a result. Actually, it's very straightforward. So we can write that every finite dimensional inner product space has an orthonormal basis. Okay. But if it is infinite dimensional, then you need extra condition. So in general, it is not true, but under certain condition, you can ensure that it will also have an orthonormal basis. Okay. So can you give me a proof or idea of for this result? Why this is true? Every finite dimension inner product space. So let V be a finite dimensional inner product space. Now, can you tell me how you will ensure that it will have an orthonormal basis? Can you give some idea?
Taking orthogonal set and then dividing the element by its norm.
But orthogonal set, existence of orthogonal set, what is the guarantee? And any orthogonal set would work. You need to show that it is an orthonormal basis. That means basis which is also an orthonormal set. And what is given is that V is finite dimensional.
सर इसके पास जो बेसिस होगा उसको ऑर्थोगोनल बना देंगे, वो भी बेसिस होगा.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That is the proof. Since you know that it is finite dimension inner product space, so you can simply say that okay, it's a finite dimension, so its dimension is finite. So you can assume that, let's say, this is a basis, just a basis. This we know that every vector space has a basis. So assume that this is a basis. Now it's a basis, so it's a linearly independent set of vectors. Now you know how to orthogonalize this set of vectors. You just apply Gram-Schmidt. So you just apply Gram-Schmidt on this process on B. If you do this, then to get on B to get let's say new set B dash. This is Q1 to Qn. But can you say that this B dash is a is an orthonormal basis?
No, sir.
No, why? Why not?
Sir, Q1 length of Q1 is not equal to 1.
Yeah, so okay, so let's say this one. Is this an orthonormal basis?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So now you know that every finite dimensional inner product space has an orthonormal basis. This is very straightforward. So this implies B dash is an orthonormal basis. But for infinite dimensional inner product space, you need some extra condition. So now the question is, okay, we already have a basis. We already know basis of a vector space. Why do we need this extra basis, this orthonormal basis, this extra term? Why do we make our life complicated? But the answer is that there is an advantage of having an orthonormal basis. So for example, let us look at this. What is the advantage here? Advantage of an orthonormal basis. So let's say we have a inner product space. Assume that it is a finite dimension. So that means let's say this is just a basis of V. So if V is the inner product space, that means it is a vector space together with an inner product defined on it. So since it's a vector space, it will have a basis. So let's say this B is a basis for V. Now it's a basis. So what we know that if I take any vector V in V, then this vector can be written as a linear combination of these basis vectors. That means I can write this V as summation I equal to 1 to n alpha I Vi for some alpha I, right? So this is what I can say. So I can say that if V is a vector, then I can write this vector as a linear combination of this V1 to Vn, but this finding these alpha i's may not be easy, or we need to do some calculation, or we need to do some computation depending on our vector space. In some cases we can find, in some cases it's not easy to find. So what I want to say is that finding these alpha i's need not be easy. It's not easy here. So what this is sort of existence result, that if V is a vector, then it can be written as a linear combination of basis vectors. But what would be these alpha i's, these coordinates? We don't know. I mean, we at this point we cannot say immediately. We need to do some computation, and then we can possibly find, or we may not be able to find these coordinates easily. But in place of this, if suppose we have a orthonormal basis, so since it's an inner product space, it's finite dimensional, so it will also have an orthonormal basis. So let's say Q1 to Qn, this is an orthonormal basis of V. Okay. Now it's an orthonormal basis, that means basis which is orthonormal set. So it's a basis, so we can say the same way that since it's a basis, so if I take any vector V, then I can write this V as a linear combination of these basis vectors. So let's say these are beta I, L, Q, I. These are the, so beta i's are the coordinates when you write V as a linear combination of these basis vectors Q1 to Qn for some beta I in the field. But since QI's are orthonormal here, so B dash is orthonormal basis. So these QI vectors, these are orthonormal vectors. We can actually tell what are these coordinates beta I. Now, can you tell me what are these beta I? How can we compute this beta I?
Inner product of V comma Qi.
Yeah, so we can take inner product of V with Qi. So if I do this inner product of V with Qi, then I can use the property of inner product. So it would be beta I Qi I equal to 1 to n. So maybe let's say j equal to 1 to n beta j, qj, and then qi. Now, if I do this, then using the fact that these q1 to qn are orthonormal, I'll get this as equal to beta j, beta I, qi, qi. But since qi are orthonormal, so their length is equal to 1. So this is just beta I. So if beta dash is an orthonormal basis, or sorry, b dash is an orthonormal basis, then we can write V as a linear combination of basis vectors, and we can tell actually what are these coordinates when we write V as a linear combination of these orthonormal bases. So this V can be written as this one. It's V qi qi. So it's easy to find. So when we have an orthonormal basis, we can immediately tell what are these coordinates, and this is just by taking the inner product of vector V with the basis vectors. Okay, so let us use this, whatever we have discussed so far. Let us use this in this example. So I have taken this simple example here. So let us suppose that we have three vectors, v1 which is 304, v2 which is let's say -107, and v3 which is 2911. Okay, in R3. Then apply, or let's say, let me ask now, can you find an orthonormal basis? Okay, listen. Can you find an orthonormal basis of a vector space spanned by this v1, v2, and v3? So the question is, can you find an orthonormal basis of the space spanned by these three vectors v1, v2, and v3?
Yes, sir.
How would you do that?
सर अगर ये
Say
LI
yes, yeah.
सर ये LI है तो बन जाएंगे.
LI नहीं भी है तो तुम स्टार्ट करो फर्स्ट वेक्टर से v1 से. You don't know these are LIs or not. In fact, this Gram-Schmidt process also gives you a way to check whether a given set of vectors is linearly independent or not. You just keep on applying Gram-Schmidt process. I mean, in theory, you can use that, but it may not be that easy. But you just apply, let's say you have three vectors, so you apply Gram-Schmidt process. First apply on v1, you will get q1. Then include v2 also. If v1, v2 are linearly dependent, then q2 would be 0. Then you go to v3. And then when you apply v3, if v3 is a linear combination of v1, then again the q3 would be 0. So all the three vectors are they span only one dimensional space. So you can say, okay, the first vector spans the whole space. You can orthonormalize it and you can find a basis. If suppose v2 is linearly independent to v1, but v3 is in the span of v1 and v2, then q3 would be 0. So you will get q1, q2. So the dimension would be 2, and you can say it's a linearly dependent set of vectors. Given set is linearly dependent set, and q1, q2 forms an orthonormal basis which is spanned by the of the space spanned by this v1, v2, v3.
हेलो सर.
Okay. Yeah.
सर अगर linearly dependent है तो orthonormal basis बोल सकते हैं उसको. v1 v2
Linearly, no, I'm not saying. What I'm saying is that suppose that you are given v1, v2, v3. You don't know they are linearly dependent or not, and you want to find a basis for this space, let's say W. Now what you will do, you start applying Gram-Schmidt on v1, v2, v3. Let's say they are linearly dependent, then you will get only, let's say v1, from v1 you will get q1. If v1 is non-zero, you will get q1. If it is 0, then you skip v1 and then you start with v2 and then call v2 as q1. And then keep on moving. If v1 is non-zero, you will get q1. Then you look at v2 and you just apply the Gram-Schmidt process. That means find the q2 if V2 is in the span of V1, then Q2 would be 0. You can try that. You just take two vectors, let's say 1, 2, 3 and 2, 4, 6. Apply Gram-Schmidt on this. This would be your Q1. But then Q2, when you apply Gram-Schmidt on this second vector V2, you will get that Q2 is 0. So you can verify this. So this Q2 would, so you remove this V2 and then look at V3. If V1, V3 are linearly independent, then you will get Q2 here from V1, V3. So this, you know that whatever vectors you get from Gram-Schmidt, they span exactly the same space. Now, since V2 is already in the span of V1 and V1, V3, so therefore V1, V2, V3, they span exactly the same space spanned by V1 and V3. But then it is the same space is spanned by Q1 and Q3, Q1 and Q2, right? So now this Q1, Q2, it's an orthogonal set. It spans the same space, so it is an orthogonal basis. And if you normalize it, then it becomes an orthonormal. So Q1, Q2, you can say it's an orthonormal basis. Okay.
Okay, sir, got it.
Yeah. So you just apply. So the question is apply Gram-Schmidt. So in this example, this V1, V2, V3, they are linearly independent, and therefore they V1, V2, V3, they form a basis of R3. And if you apply Gram-Schmidt on V1, V2, V3, you'll get Q1, Q2, Q3. That would be an orthogonal basis. Orthogonal basis means it's a basis which is also an orthogonal set. Orthonormal basis, it's a basis which is also an orthonormal set. Okay. So apply Gram-Schmidt process on V1, V2, V3 to find an orthonormal basis of R3. Why I'm saying R3? Because V1, V2, V3 are linearly independent, so they form a basis for R3. So let me do this example, some calculation here. So how do we do this? So we know that Q1, the first vector Q1 is just V1. So Q1 would be 304. So we'll get an orthogonal set first, and then we'll normalize it to get an orthonormal set. So Q1 is V1. So this is my Q1. Then I'll look at Q2. So Q2 is what? What was the formula? It is V2 minus V2 Q1 divided by the length of Q1, Q1. Okay. Okay, can you tell me what is this? So write this. V2 is what? V2 is minus 107. And if I'm not mentioning any inner product on this, then you assume that the standard inner product is used. So on R3, you know the standard inner product. So what is the value of this numerator here? Inner product of V2 with Q1. So just write V2 is minus 107. Yeah. And then Q1 is 304. Then you divide it by length of Q1. It is 304. 304. And then here multiply whatever factor you get, you multiply with this 304. So you get minus 107. What is this here? So what is this? The first one. So what is the numerator?
So 25 by 5.
Yeah, 25 by 5. So it is just 5. Right? So 25 by 5. So it is just 5. 25 by 25.
Yes, sir.
25 by
25 by 25.
Yes.
So it is just 1. So you will get 304. Now you divide, subtract this, and what you get? Minus 2, minus, oh, sorry, 203.
So minus 4.
Sorry, minus 4, right? Minus 4. You'll get minus 403. Similarly, now you get, so this is your Q2. Now Q3 would be V3 minus the same way V3 Q1 divided by length of Q1. This is Q1. and minus V3 Q2 length of Q2 multiplied by Q2. If you do the calculation for this, let me write directly. After simplifying this, you will get 090. So Q1, Q2, Q3, you can check that Q1, Q2, Q3 are orthogonal, and when you divide each of them with their length, then you can find an orthonormal set. So let's say from here you can say that Q1, Q2, Q3 they form an orthogonal basis. But if you divide Q1 by its length, Q2 by its length, and Q3 by its length, then you will get orthonormal basis. So can you quickly tell me what would be the first one in the orthonormal basis? Q1 divided by its length. What it would be?
1 by
What
5,
is
3 by 5, 0, 4 by 5.
yeah, 3, 5, 5,
Length is
0,
1.
4 by 5. Then next.
0, 1, 0. No.
Minus 4 by
Minus
5,
4
0, 3 by 5.
Yeah, it's same, minus 4 by 5, 0, 3 by 5. And similarly for Q3 also you can find it is just
0, 1, 0.
0,
0, 1, 0. So this is your orthonormal basis. This way you have to find. So here I have taken an easy example, simple example. But if I give you any inner product space, and if I ask you to find, if I give you a linearly independent set of vectors or some finite set of vectors, if I ask you to apply Gram-Smith, you have to use the same way. Only thing is that here the inner product will change. So you have to use the inner product which is given to you, and then use the same calculation, same formula. You will get a orthogonal and then therefore orthonormal set of vectors. Now, if I ask you for the same example, if I let's say give you any vector x1, x2, x3, then you can quickly tell me that what is the how do you write this x1, x2, x3 as a linear combination of, let's say this is q1 tilde, q2 tilde, and q3 tilde, the linear combination of this orthonormal basis. So what I'm saying is that because of the observation we made, this x1, x2, x3, this can be written as alpha 1 q1 tilde plus alpha 2 q2 tilde plus alpha 2 q2 tilde and alpha 3 q3 tilde, where this alpha I, you know what is this alpha I? Alpha is just x1, x2, x3, inner product of x1, x2, x3 with qi tilde for I equal to 1, 2, 3. So you can easily write any vector as a linear combination of this basis vector. All right. All right. So let us move on. Next is the next terminology or next term in this inner product we define as a orthogonal complement. So let me first define this and then we talk about this. Orthogonal complement. So suppose that we have a, so what it is, so let V be an inner product space and let's say U be a subspace of V, then the orthogonal complement of U is defined by, so orthogonal complement means you collect all the vectors which are orthogonal to this space U. That means each vector in this subspace U. So then the orthogonal complement of U is denoted by, so we use this notation U perp, and this is the collection of all vectors in the vector space such that the inner product of u v is 0 for all u in the subspace u. So that means you collect all the vectors in V which are orthogonal to the subspace U. When we say that orthogonal to a subspace, that means it is orthogonal to each vector in the subspace. Now, it's not that difficult to find this orthogonal complement. At least, let's say, if I give you immediately, let's say R2. If I give you R2, and if I give you W or U as this x-axis, so this is U and V is R2. Can you tell me orthogonal complement of U quickly?
Y-axis.
It's a y-axis. So every vector is you take in this y-axis that is orthogonal to U. So, or in other word, in place of let's say R2, if let's say we are in Rn. Okay, so let's say I am in Rn. And in Rn, I give you, let's say U or Rn in, let's say n is 9. Okay, just for example. So we are in R9 and U is a subspace which is spanned by, let's say, these three vectors. Assume that x1, x2, x3 are linearly independent. So basically dimension of U is 3. Okay, so this is this. Now can you guess what would be orthogonal complement of U?
Except
Just some idea.
Except these three elements.
Sorry.
Except these three basis.
Except these three basis means except these three vectors or
Except these three vectors and basis. Except these three vectors from basis of E.
From basis of U, except these three vectors, every vector is in the orthogonal complement. So whatever you are saying that will not even work for this example in R2. So this was your U, and this you said that this is in the orthogonal complement. So now if I take any vector here, this vector is not in U, right? But it is not orthogonal to U. So whatever you are saying is not true. If you look at here, what you did is that you have U here. So you have U here. And then sort of you have some idea that, okay, in this example, at least it's a 2-dimension space. So let's say you have some basis for this, let's say E1, this is a basis for U. And then you found a vector U2, let's say E2 here, such that this E2 is orthogonal to E1. Not only that, if you look at this E1, E2, they span the whole space.
सर इसको बेसिस में एक्सटेंड कर सकते हैं R9 के, फिर उसको ऑर्थोगोनल बेसिस बना लेंगे, फिर Q4 से Q9 से जो स्पैन होगा वो हो जाएगा ऑर्थोगोनल कॉम्प्लीमेंट.
Right, exactly. That is the idea. So what he's saying that since we know a basis for U, x1, x2, x3, you extend this basis, let's say x4 to x9 to a basis of R9, and then you apply Gram-Schmidt on this, then you will get, let's say, on this Q1 to Q9, Q4 to Q9, and here you will get Q1 to Q3. So whatever vectors here you have received, Q4 to Q9, they form a basis. They form they span the orthogonal complement of. That is the idea. But basically, you can generalize this idea for any inner product space that I'll give in the next result. So what next result says, it says that, so whatever idea we talked about here, extending the basis and so on, that is when we have finite dimension. But even when V is infinite dimension, we can say the following. So let me write this as a result. This result says that suppose we have an inner product space. So let V be an inner product space. It can be infinite dimension also. And suppose that U is a basis, or U is a subspace of V, which is of finite dimension. So V can be infinite dimension, but let us assume that U is finite dimensional subspace. Okay, U is finite dimension subspace of V. Then you can write that V, you can write V as a direct sum of U and its complement. By the way, you can verify that this U orthogonal complement, this set here, this is always a subspace. This is always a subspace of V. So U orthogonal complement is always a subspace of V. And this result says that if we have an inner product space and if we have a finite dimension subspace of V, then this V can be written as a direct sum of U and its orthogonal complement. Now, if V is finite dimensional, then whatever you just said, I mean, previous to this result, that will work, that we can be written as a proof. So for example, what I'm saying is the following. So if suppose, so let us recall what we did in the discussion prior to this result. So if suppose V is R9 and U is a span of x1, x2, x3, then what you did, you said that you just expand this basis, this set to a basis x4 to x9, and then you apply Gram-Smith to find this vector. And then whatever Q4 to Q9 you have got, that would be that would form the orthogonal complement of U, orthogonal complement of U. That is what you said. In fact, if you look at this whole basis, Q1 to Q9, this is an orthonormal basis. So every vector V, if I take in the vector space, then this V can be written as a alpha I Qi I equal to 1 to 3. That means here plus, let's say, beta I Qi I equal to 4 to 9. That means vectors here. So what you can say that this belongs to U and this belong to U orthogonal complement. And this is true for every vector V. So in fact, you can say that V is a sum, can be written as a sum of U and U per for this example. And then you can also show that U and U orthogonal complement, they have only the zero vector in common. And therefore V is the direct sum of U and U per. But not only for this R9, there is nothing special. We did not use the fact that it has to be 9 and it should be R9. In fact, if we have any vector space V which is of finite dimensional, then we do the same process. We can apply the same process. We'll first look at the basis of U, which is, let's say, x4 to xk. Then we expand this basis U to a basis of V, because V is finite dimension, so we can do that. Then we can apply a Gram-Smith process on that. Then whatever extra vector we have added here, we have corresponding to this extra vector here, they will form a basis for orthogonal complement. In fact, that can be used in order to write V as a direct sum of U and U per. So are you getting what I'm saying? So it's easy to verify here for this finite dimensional. But here we are trying to prove it for when V is infinite dimension, but U is finite dimensional. So subspace can be of finite dimensional, right? If V is infinite dimension, we can always talk about its finite dimensional subspace. So let us prove this result. So whatever I just mentioned, that can be used when we want to prove this result for finite dimension, but now we want to use for infinite dimension. So let us prove this. So what is given to us? Given to us is a finite dimensional subspace of V. So what we can do here? U is a finite dimensional subspace. If it is finite dimensional, we can talk about an orthonormal basis of U. So let Q1 to Qm. This is an orthonormal basis of U. We can always do that. We can always find an orthonormal basis of U because U is finite dimensional, and every finite dimensional space has a orthonormal basis. We have already seen. So assume that Q1 to Qm is an orthonormal basis of U. Okay. Now I want to write. So if I take any vector, let's say, okay. So I want to write V as a direct sum of U and U per. Okay. So if I take any vector, let's say V in V, and if I set this new vector, let's say U, small u, as this one. So this is V Qi, I equal to 1 to M. So basically what is this? This is the orthogonal. So what is this U vector? U is the orthogonal complement of V in the direction of basis vectors of U. So basically what I am doing here, you can see here, I have set this new vector U as this vector. This is in the span of Qi, where these coordinates are some particular they are chosen in a particular way. They are just the inner product of V with this Qi. So this vector is in U, right? So if with this, if I then I can write this V as U plus V minus U. Clearly you can verify that this vector U, you will see why I have chosen it in this way, because with this choice, clearly this U is in the subspace U, because it's a linear combination of this Q1 to Qm. And you can also verify that this V minus U, you can call it as W. This vector is in U par. Or what I'm saying, let us call this vector as W. Okay. So then you can say that clearly U is in subspace U, and also if you do this W, you want to show that this W is in the orthogonal complement of U. In order to show that, if you just show that this W is orthogonal to each of these basis vectors, then that is fine. That is enough. So you just look at this W, inner product of W with Qi, where Qi's are the basis vector, then what it would be. So what is W? W is V minus U. Take the inner product with Qi. If you do this, then it is V Qi minus inner product of U with Qi. Now this is V Qi. Now can you tell me what is this one? What is the inner product of U with Qi? Can you tell me what is this one? What is this?
VQI.
It's just VQI. Just use the fact that Q1 to Qn, they are orthonormal. So it would be VQI. And therefore it is 0. So you can see that this W is orthogonal to each of these Qi, and therefore W is orthogonal to it's a span, but its span is actually U. So W is orthogonal to U, and therefore you can say that this implies that W is in the orthogonal complement of U. So what you can say from here is that you can say that this implies that V is a subspace of is a subset of U plus U orthogonal complement. But since U and U orthogonal complement both are subspaces of V, so this is also true, and therefore V is equal to U plus U per. So this is fine. So V can be written as a linear sum of vectors in U and U per. Now we have to show that their intersection is just the zero vector in order to say that V is the direct sum of U and U per. So clearly, since U and U per, so again clearly U and U per are subspaces, so zero is always there. Clearly this is true, right? For converse, or for the other side inclusion, let us take any vector V in U, U intersection.
Sir, intersection.
Yeah, intersection, sorry. It's U intersection. So take V, any vector in the intersection. If this is in the intersection, then V is in U and V is also in U per. Now, what can you say from this? What can you say from here? V is a vector in U and V is also a vector in U per. What does it mean?
Their inner product is 0.
Because by definition, if V is in U per, then it would be orthogonal to every vector in U. So from here, by definition, you can say, so by definition, from here you say that V with the inner product with V inner product with itself is 0. But then this implies that V is 0. But then this implies that U intersection U per is just a zero space. Right? So therefore you can say that V can be written as a direct sum of U and U per. Okay. Now let me give you an exercise. You can verify this. So exercise is the following. Let V be a finite dimensional vector space and U be a subspace of V. Okay, then you can show that U is actually U per the perp of U per. So that means orthogonal complement of U, or you can say U double orthogonal complement. So this for this we sometimes also use the notation U double perp. So U is equal to U double perp. Now this you can show because orthogonal complement of U is a subset of V here. So it's a subset. In fact, it's a subspace. So you can talk the same way. You can talk about perp of this set. It would be double perp, U double perp. And in fact, you can show that U double perp is actually equal to U. Okay. All right. So how much time we have? Okay, we have 15 minutes. So let me introduce one more term in this inner product space. It is orthogonal projection. So let's define orthogonal projection. So can you first define what is a projection? What is a projection? In linear algebra, have you heard about projection before?
Yes, sir. Projection maps.
Yeah, what is this?
Uh, so in particular, we talk about the R2 space, then uh, up map defined from R2 to R2, such that T of xy goes to x0, then it is a projection on x-axis. T of xy
Hmm.
equals to 0y, then it is a projection on y-axis.
Yes, but actually you can, I understand what you're saying, but in general also, if it's a if it's a vector space, then you can talk about a projection map. So what is a projection? Projection is just a linear transformation. So if I give you this definition, then you can verify that whatever example you are giving, they all fall in this. So a projection is what? A projection is a linear transformation from V to V. A projection on a vector space V is a linear operator such that, so let's say it is, let us call this operator P. So an operator, linear operator P on a vector space V is called a projection if P square is equal to P. Okay, or you can say if you take the composition of P with itself, then it gives you the transformation P. And it is called orthogonal projection if it is a projection. That means the first condition is satisfied. That means P square equal to P. In addition to that, if the range of P, since it's a linear transformation, it's a linear operator, we can talk about its range and null. So if the range of P is orthogonal to null of P, then you can say that it's an orthogonal projection. So there are different ways to define orthogonal projection. I have also given you one condition in the tutorial sheet. So there are several equivalent ways to say a given transformation is a orthogonal projection. We will use this definition. So what is the definition? Let V be an inner product space. Since we are talking about orthogonal projection, so we need inner product also, because orthogonality is defined in with respect to some inner product. Okay, but as I mentioned, projection can be defined on any vector space, but here we are talking about orthogonal projection. So let V be an inner product space and P be a operator, a linear operator on V. So that is P be a linear operator. It's a linear transformation from V to V. Then this P is called a projection. It is called a projection if P square is equal to P. That means composition of P with itself gives you the operator P. And the secondly, it is called orthogonal projection. It is P is called an orthogonal projection if P is a projection and range of P is orthogonal to null of P. Okay, so the example which you gave, that is an example of orthogonal projection. But there are projections which are not necessarily orthogonal projection. In fact, you can, so in orthogonal projection we are basically looking the projection or the vector, we are projecting the vectors on a perpendicular space. Okay, orthogonal space. But instead of or perpendicular means a space which is making 90-degree angle, right? In a, roughly we can say, vaguely we can say in this way. But if the angle is different, then it is not orthogonal, but it is still a projection. So there are different ways of projecting a space on some other space. This oblique projection. There are many kind of projections are there, but we are interested here in orthogonal projection. Okay. So for example, let me give you an example. So suppose that we have an inner product space and let's say U be a subspace, and assume that it is a finite dimensional subspace. Okay. So then, if you look at the proof of this, so here also we have a inner product space and we have a finite dimensional subspace of U. Then you can look at here. We can write this phi as a sum of U plus W, where U is in U and W is in U per. So basically, this factor U here, this in this linear sum, the component of U is actually the orthogonal projection of defines an orthogonal projection on this V. So that means if you send every vector, so every vector V can be written in this U plus W. So if you send every vector V to this U, then it gives you a projection. It defines a projection on this inner product space, and this projection is actually an orthogonal projection. This is the example I'm giving you here. So suppose that we have an inner product space and we have a finite dimensional subspace of U. So it is a general example. Now you can change your vector space, inner product space, and you can take U any subspace, any finite dimensional subspace. Then you, in this way, you can define orthogonal projection. Okay. So if it is a finite dimensional subspace, then you can talk about its orthonormal basis. So let's say this is an orthonormal basis of U. You can this map, as I mentioned, you can define this map. Let's say, let us call this map as P U. So that means it's a projection on U. Okay. From V to V, how it is defined? You send any vector, you take any vector V in V, then you can write V as I mentioned as a sum of V U plus W here, where U is in U and W is in U per. This we can do because of the previous result, because of this result. And what is this U? U is a vector which is in this form. Okay. So basically, what you call in this way, we say that U is actually a vector which is which is the, you can say, the orthogonal sum of orthogonal complement of V in the direction of basis vectors of U. So what you can say is that how you can define, you can send this vector V to this one, V qi I equal to 1 to n. So you can verify that this map is a well-defined map. Not only that, so then you can check that this PU is actually a projection. So you can say that PU is a linear operator on V. In fact, you can say that it is a projection. So when you do it this way, you get PU itself. So this map, this operator P subscript U is a projection on V. Secondly, you can check that when you do the range space of PU, if you look at the range space of PU, can you tell me what would be the range space of this?
U.
It would be U, because you can see here these QIs, they form a basis for U, and the range space here clearly is the span of this QI. So range space of PU is U, and you can also verify. Can you tell me what would be the null space of PU from this map? When it would be 0? So when it would be 0 here? Yeah, so if V is in the orthogonal complement of U, then you can see that this V is V inner product with QI would be 0, because this QI belong to U, and therefore it would be 0. So in fact, you can say that the null of PU is U per. So clearly, range of PU is orthogonal to null of PU, and therefore you can say that this projection is an orthogonal projection. So this implies that PU is an orthogonal So this, whatever I just mentioned here, you can verify this projection of. So what we say that PU is an orthogonal projection of V onto Q. This is how we say. Okay. So this you can easily write, or you can easily verify. So it's time, so we'll stop here. In the next example, I will give you an application of orthogonal projection. That means how it is useful in like approximating a given vector uh, with a vector in a given subspace, or you can say that how it can be used to find the distance of a vector from a given subspace. So that way also you can think of. So we can stop here, and in the next class I will try to finish this inner product for the timing, and then we will define eigenvalue eigenvectors. Or probably I'll take next lecture as an application, okay, as a lecture of applications, okay. So where I may talk about application of eigenvalue eigenvectors and application of linear transformation. So let us take next lecture as a on application of linear algebra. Okay, I will first finish this inner product, and then I will talk about application. So we won't define new topic in the next class. The next class I will finish this inner product, and then I'll talk about application of linear algebra in our daily life. So if you have any doubt, you can ask. Otherwise, we stop here.
Sir, this thing, the last line of the example.
Yes.
So V onto U, I मतलब थोड़ा सा
So
awkward
this is the way of saying. Onto means the range of PU is U. So it is on U. This is the language we use for this projection. So it's a projection of V onto U. So onto U or on U also you can say is the same. It's just a way of saying that the range space. This way we can say that the range space of the projection is actually U.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so stop here.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Yeah, same to you.